It's been forever since we published our last Pinecone video where we used Pinecone to create a chatbot to talk to our Airtable data, that I've been wondering whether or not Pinecone and vector databases in general are the answer moving forward for data retrieval from Airtable. Not just like creating a chatbot, that's cool, but what if I want to create a more dynamic search of my database using natural language? This really comes from some of our clients who are in real estate and maybe automotive sales that kind of need this sort of thing to dynamically, with natural language, fetch certain records based on like a query, that they give us, almost in a chat form. It's time to see if vector databases are the answer moving forward, or should we stick to the good old parameter-based Airtable querying that we've been doing for years? Yeah, this is complicated, but let me explain. We're going to kick things off with a very quick demo of the system. Essentially, we're impersonating a real estate agency and we are in NoLoco, but at the same time, we also have like our, list of properties here in Airtable, standard stuff about the property. There's like the property type, the address, the property value, some images, numbers of beds and baths, and the square foot. And the big idea here is that I can ask a question, right? So I've already asked the question here, but let's just like modify it so that we can see how it works. So I need the properties that have less than, or let's say more than 5K in area and cost less than $10 million. Press confirm. The search gets initialized. We have two matched properties, and a few seconds later, boom, we've got our properties here. Now, of course, because this is NoLoco, we can actually see these properties in a very nice like little card, and it's all very, very pretty, and all that is very good. So let's ask it another question. What are the properties with value of more than 10 million? Confirm. And again, the system is gonna just initialize. We have our question here. We should quickly see, it's a bit too quick. So 15 properties match that description. And you can see here that all of them are more than 10 million. I doubt that we should have any one of them be less than 10. But yeah, that's basically it. Now, let's take a look at how this whole thing is set up, starting with Airtable. I must admit, the whole Airtable setup is fairly simple. However, the general project is not very simple. I would actually say that the purpose of the whole video is not to necessarily help you DIY this, but get you accustomed or like familiar with the concept of AI search. Notice how I said AI and not vector? There is a point to this, but stick with me till the end and I'll explain why. Talking about Airtable, there's not much going on. I basically have a list of users, super straightforward. I also have a list of properties, super straightforward. I have some automations that fetch my lat long. I'm not gonna go into that. But generally speaking, it's just a very vanilla setup of Airtable, nothing much to call home about. It's time to take a look at how this whole thing is set up, really from the perspective of, query. As I said, thought I was going to use vectors, and I tried using vectors. However, I had very mixed results. Vast majority of my questions actually involved the vector database bringing in all the data in the database. Thinking about sustainability, I was kind of thinking that this is not really going to be sustainable if I have 50,000 records, and every single time I need to kind of like fetch 50,000 records and give that to AI in order to, produce some kind of valuable results. So I talked to a friend who works for one of the big 4 biggest accounting firms in the world, the branch in Cyprus. Because he's like in the machine learning department, he suggested something very clever. Instead of using vectors, just use AI to create the dynamic query for Airtable. And I'm not gonna go into like major depths of how this is set up. This is fairly simplistic. We fetch the question, we fetch the actual data from NoLoco or like Airtable. But the most interesting thing is this part of our make automation, which basically brings us the records. The first thing that we do, and this is a very key step, is to actually fetch the schema of Airtable. In other words, fetch the fields within my properties table. And this is how I do it. I actually fetch one record from properties, doesn't matter what. In fact, I tell it which fields I want it to fetch. And then I aggregate everything into a text field so that it looks like this. And it looks fairly annoying, kind of like a JSON, basically. In fact, it is a JSON. So the next thing is to actually fetch the schema. This is the prompt that I'm using. And yeah, this is basically how it looks like. And I'm using the transform text to structured data. However, this produces this very simple table of fields. Very cool. From there, and this is the coolest bit of this whole thing, this is what you came here for. I'm basically giving it the fields. I'm giving OpenAI my fields, table of fields. I'm giving it the user query, and I'm basically saying, look, based on the query, based on these fields, create for me a query that I can use in Airtable. Moreover, I'm also using a number of records required. In other words, depending on the query of the user, do I need to fetch one record or multiple records? And when it comes to my querying, instead of using vectors, I'm using good old Airtable search. But my formula is dynamic. It's dynamic from the perspective of ChatGPT always creates my API Airtable, my Airtable API filter string that we usually use in a very typical Airtable search module. But instead of like hard coding it, I want to make it dynamic. And that's the whole secret. That's the whole thing. Basically, make the formula dynamic. Make ChatGPT come up with a formula on the spot every time. Now, I'm also getting the number of records required because that's kind of important too. Sometimes when I was testing, I want all the properties that match X, or I want the property with the most amount of baths or something. It would misbehave a little bit. So there's also an extra little parameter here that is the number of records required. Basically, I'm telling ChatGPT to determine whether the user is needing one record or multiple records. That's basically it. That's how it's done. From there, all I'm really doing is, I'm just basically aggregating all of the results that I get from my particular query. And then basically I tattoo those query results into my user related properties, because that's kind of like how it works. That's it. There's really not much else to this. I had a lot of fun building this whole thing out, especially with the fact that vectors don't really match, or I feel like I've kind of lost my faith in our usage of vector databases. However, I feel like there is a place for them, but I think for now, AI that performs our queries is the way forward. That's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.